Hello once again everyone, and welcome back to our continued series of Going Posta. And joining me once again is Jake, my resident Italian. And what we're going to be doing now is, last week we tackled Posta di Donna, Distraza, which because of old habits I kept calling Distreza. It is Distraza, there is an A. But today we're going to be moving on to Finestra. Now, Finestra means window, and it's an interesting guard, especially if you are coming into Fiore from having first done one of the other longsword systems, especially from having done the German longsword systems. You might think, oh, Finestra is going to be comparable to Ox. But while yes it is also more than that. Personally, I compare Finestra a bit more to Schlüssel, but that gets into a deeper topic. I will just say, if you're familiar with those two guards, think on it, and you might see how I came to my conclusion. But Finestra is formed like so, wherein I have used the Voltastablet to push myself backward. My arms are held at about the level of my head. Sometimes the tip will be more down, sometimes the tip will be slightly more up, just like sometimes the hands will be a little bit lower, or perhaps a little bit higher. Now, I'm not turned all the way back. I'm just kind of open in position, so that way I can push that energy forwards with my potential attack. Finestra can be taken on both sides, and there's no difference in the sides really, other than one side your hands are uncrossed, the other side your hands are crossed, and you can move between them. So, first and foremost, the thing that Finestra is best at is going to be, from Finestra, you can move into any other guard. So what that means is basically, once I take Finestra, it's very simple for me to push down, I can move from there, I can pull the tip back, I can very easily open the tip. It's really not hard for me from this position to move into any of my other guards. And furthermore, if we're talking about just throwing cuts out, anytime I throw a cut, I can just retract back, regardless of what cut it is. And I can also, if I'm using passing steps or things along those lines, right, I can fold back into Finestra on the other side, which is something we're going to be doing quite a bit. It is very simple for you to move into it from other guards or move out of it to another position, which is very good for us, because it's not necessarily a position you want to be standing in. It is something you'll move through, but it's not one you're going to want to hold for too long. And that kind of leads us into its second main attribute. That being, it is very good at launching thrusts and very good at covering. So, we'll go ahead and get the obvious one out of the way. What do we mean by good at launching thrusts? Well, we've got our point forward, we've got our hips back. That means that at any point I can very easily push that forward and either passare with it, or even not, I can just stay in place and still go all the way out to posta longa with the same amount of strength and leverage that I would have were I passing. This makes it a particularly good guard to do counter thrusts out of, which is not necessarily something that, well, we will get to the exchanging of points. But if someone just cuts at me and I'm in Finestra, it's not particularly hard for me to push this guy out, dealing with his thrust and hitting him in the same time. It's perfectly strong. And for that reason, that can be quite useful. So that's part one. Part two is covering, and this is something that people talk about a little bit less. Now, tinfoil hats on. Personally, I believe Finestra to be not just here, but to be kind of anywhere between here and here, volta or no. Reason being is because it's often a position you will find yourself moving into. And in fact, pretty much anyone that's fenced with a longsword for a while will move into a Finestra-like position to cover themselves at one point or another. So for example, right, let's say I have made my cover from an incoming cut. As we talked about, it is not uncommon for people to cut around at us, right? And pretty much everyone, this is going to be their first trick. They throw one cut, then they step around and throw second cut. And in fact, a chart was recently done where they polled like a ton of HEMA fighters, and the biggest thing they discovered is that the majority of wounds you will receive fighting against right-handed people and as a right-handed person is going to be on your right side. This is because you're used to parrying the initial action, but that follow-up action is where the majority of hits land. As such, learning to guard your right side is a very pivotal skill. The mistake a lot of people make is they try to cover it with their short edge, which that does not create a particularly strong shape. We'll get to how to do that later. But for now, the biggest advice that I can give someone is to just turn your long edge. Just that does so much more, right? Which basically puts us into Finestra. And that is what I believe Fiore is talking about in regards to covering. As especially if you remain with your left foot forward, right? Someone cuts at you, you cover, they cut around. Volta or no, turning my long edge to this side gives me a much better chance of defending myself. If I volta with it, it's akin to me stepping with the cut, right? The same exact sort of application of hips appears. The nice thing is, though, by staying in place, I will actually push him a little bit more out of presence and set myself up better for some opportunities. But really, it's 6 1/2 dozen, you know? If, for example, same thing happens, you know, he cuts in, I cover, he cuts around, I can absolutely still move with it, and I end up in a Finestra-like position, but I still believe this to be within the family. And just depending upon where he's cutting on your body, your Finestra may look more or less dramatic. Like at the moment, he's cutting more for about here, so my Finestra is remaining relatively low. Let's see what happens when he cuts a little higher. My Finestra got a lot higher as well. And this looks not dissimilar at all from our starting guard. So this is kind of what I'm thinking of Finestra in regards to covering. Not to mention, of course, like we talked about last time, if I need to from here, I can move out into basically Posta Longa to cover myself, though we did discuss how that wasn't necessarily super strong. Can the same concept be used on the other side? Yes, it can. So the biggest thing about that is that you're going to be wanting to use it when you have put your right foot forward. So, for example, let's say I cut at him first, he beats my blade aside and is cutting at me. Same exact idea. I'm now pulling back into left Finestra to protect myself. And we will also see this same position used in response to the breaking at the point. So if he has broken my point downward, he's looking to cut upward. That's the most natural thing I can do to protect myself in time. And Fiore's plays reflect this idea of coming back up into left Finestra to deal with something coming from below. So, these are the sorts of covers that we're talking about. But without a doubt, the most useful one, in my opinion, to practice like right now is that one. Just get used to turning your long edge. You don't necessarily have to turn it up, but turning it to this side so that you have that strength is going to save everything in this target area quite a few times. And from there, if you get particularly good at it, you do get a fun riposte opportunity. That would be cover, Finestra, Fendente, fantastic. But, either way, that's what I think he means by his covering. Now, let's start talking about the actual plays that you can do out of here. So, a couple options. The first one is going to be, of course, we can make our powerful thrusts, which we talked about, but those thrusts can come in a couple different forms, which I want to talk about. So from here, I can, of course, as I already showed, do a thrust where I step forward. I can even step more directly at him with my full extension. I tend to step a bit more to the side on habit, but it works the same either way. We can do a thrust where I'm already in distance and I'm just extending out into Posta Longa. That's particularly good if you want to then use plays from Posta Longa, so you're moving from one guard to another guard with a threat, and then you can work from there. We'll get more to that when we do Posta Longa. Another option would be, rather than terminating in a Posta Longa-like position, we're going to go ahead and go all the way across and end up going into Finestra. So from here, rather than just going down here and keeping my hands low, I'm going to instead let myself go up into Finestra on my other side. Now, there's a couple reasons you would do this. Number one is power, right? Rather than going down the middle, I go all the way across, which gives me some extra extension. It also is very good at jamming cuts, which is point number two. His most likely thing that he's going to do to protect himself is to bring his tip over. So if as my tip is going through, I'm reinforcing it, now I'm using leverage against him. These same concepts are done in pretty much every sword fighting system on the planet. Another thing that this is very good about is I personally like to use this to stifle someone who's going to give me a good cut out of Posta Donna, right? If I see him there, I'm going to just push through. I can lock him out. It's great, it's grand, it's wonderful. And in general, following your thrust to here, step or no step, this is a safe follow-up to prevent yourself from getting struck in the head afterwards. But it should be noted, Fiore at no point shows a thrust terminating this way, but I see no reason that he would not do so. But, either way, those are the kinds of thrusts we're looking at. So let's talk about now exchanging points and breaking points. So, for the exchange of thrusts, this one's going to be very, very simple. All that's going to happen is he's going to thrust at me, I step out as I have done before, and because I have such a apt guard for thrusting, this play is stupidly easy to do. Frankly, I would say that anytime you're in Finestra, if someone dares thrust at you, you've pretty much got them. Even if they try to be clever, you're making this wonderful cone, you're in a really good spot. So here's that again. He tries to thrust at me, no problem. Even if I'm late on my sideways step, my offline step, this is always coming to middle with that spiraling energy. It's just too safe. It's really fantastic. Let's switch sides real quick and show that again. So he thrusts. It's really hard for him to hit me. Even if he tries to keep his point on target, he has to fight through so much leverage to hit me, it's just not going to happen. But the next thing, and conveniently we switch sides for this, is going to be breaking the point. Now this one's a little trickier. So first off, you can do this on both sides, right? Just like you can exchange points on both sides, which we know, you can still achieve that same thing from left Finestra. It's just not going to be quite as powerful since you're going to be crossing your arms rather than uncrossing. General sword thing for you there. If you are crossing your arms, it's going to be a little bit weaker, but you'll start off with a little more reach, versus if you are uncrossing them, it will have more strength. But oftentimes people find in this level here, find that a little bit uncomfortable. So bear that in mind. But for breaking the point especially, this can be done either way quite comfortably. So what's going to happen here, we'll do this slow motion. He's going to start thrusting at me, and my priority is, as before, to get my sword down and across. This time, though, my offline movement is going to matter even more, because rather than coming from above with something that seizes down here, I'm going from high, tight. So very similar to when we did this. So what I kind of want to think about to make this work is I'm going to thrust, the same as I did when I exchanged points, but I'm going to thrust kind of over his weapon, and I find this leads to good success. So here it is, slow motion, and we'll do it a little more realsies. Thus I have broken his point downward. I stepped out of the way, I follow through as I do, and look, he's using Finestra too. Now we'll show it a little bit more fluidly. No problem. Now, you can do the same thing from left Finestra, which is very important, right? And the reason for this is that, of course, we just talked about how Finestra can be used as a cover, okay? One of the common things that you will see people learn, not necessarily like a super common trick, but one of the ones you can expect to see is someone will cut at you, you'll make your cover, go ahead and make your cover for me, right? You'll make a cover, and from here they will pull and thrust to a low opening. Which means, if you just made your cover in Finestra, here comes a thrust, you're breaking the point. It's the exact same concept. So it's highly likely that both on right, and especially on left Finestra, you will need to do this. So, here's breaking the point from left Finestra, right? I just covered, he pulls the thrust, same exact idea, I push down and across. Now, I will say, that one's just a little bit scarier, because of course, you don't quite have the same mechanical benefit, but it is one that there's a decent chance you're going to need to do. The biggest thing to remember is that once you do breaking up the point from the left side, we'll talk more about this next week with Posta Sinistra, you're going to need to look for more of a closing action, as you'll have control of his sword arm. So let's switch sides on that real quick, and I'll just address it again briefly. So, I ended up here, I covered, he went to thrust, pushed down. Because his sword arm is now here, and I've broken the point like so, it is best for me either to follow through with some sort of half sword action, or alternatively, for me to look for one of my close range plays, of which there are many options. But, all in all, that's going to be what Finestra is particularly good at. So to just quickly recap, we talked about how it can fire powerful thrusts, right? We talked about how it can be used to cover yourself. Either you've cut, cover, or alternatively, you've covered, then you cover again. It can also be used as a general movement point from here. It's very easy for me to move into all of my other guards. This is on both sides, by the way, just as long as you know where you're going. We talked about how it can break the point, and we talked about how it can exchange points. So, overall, Finestra, absolutely fantastic guard. Big favorite of mine. But, thank you very much, Jay. And thank you all for your continued watching. So, next week we'll be tackling the infamous, the scary Posta Sinistra, and also talking a little bit more about some of the concepts we just touched upon. So, stay tuned for that. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and we'll go over some other techniques another time.